Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Generic Cappy YouTube channel. I hope you're all doing well and staying safe. I'm Amar, otherwise known as Generic Cappy, and on April 2nd, 2025, at 6 a.m. PT, 9 a.m. ET, Nintendo will be hosting the Nintendo Switch 2 Nintendo Direct, which at the time of recording is less than 48 hours away. So I figured this would be the best time to release some predictions for this Direct, or pretty much all my predictions for this Direct, as well as talk about some of my expectations going into the Direct and just generally about the Direct. I am very excited for this Direct. I'm expecting Nintendo to talk about a lot of the things that we've kind of been expecting to talk about for a little bit now, but now it's all going to be in a comprehensive Nintendo Direct, so I'm very excited for that. If you do enjoy this video, please feel free to leave a like on the video, as well as leave your own predictions down in the comments below. But without further ado, let's get right into it. So as I mentioned, I am very excited for this Nintendo Direct. This has been something I've been looking forward to since last year. We've been talking about the Nintendo Switch 2, or as we knew it by the point of May 2024 as the Nintendo Switch successor. We've been talking about this for a very long time. We've talked about the games that will appear on this on the system, at launch or just in general. A lot of the games that we've been waiting for. A lot of series to finally make their next entry on the console. So I'm very excited to finally be able to see some of these games, see the console again. From the January 2025 reveal. And yeah, so for my predictions, I have split it into two different segments. I do expect Nintendo to also split the Direct either into two different segments, or for there just to be distinct news on two different areas, being the hardware itself and the software. So I figured this would be the way I should also frame my predictions, just because this is a little different from other predictions or other Directs in terms of we obviously are getting hardware information. This isn't something we normally get from Directs. So and I guess I'm not really sure if you can call this a general Nintendo Direct. It is a very special Nintendo Direct, but again, we are gonna have a Direct that's split probably within like two segments of just hardware news and software news. So I figured that is where I would also put my predictions. I think I'm gonna go in an order. So this first part of this video will be hardware, and the second part will be software. And yeah, so my hardware predictions also include what I think the price of the console will be and the release date. I've been pondering both of those a lot recently, but yeah, without further ado, again, let's get right into it. So to start my hardware predictions, it's really hard to talk about the console and all of the things we've already seen about it. I'm predicting things like the mouse mode, some of the controllers we might see in this Direct, the C button, which Nintendo has now been teasing for a little bit now, in recent promotional videos and on the countdown for the Direct on Nintendo Today. We've been seeing a lot of I guess it'd be like promotional clips and promotional footage that has the C button on the right Joy-Con. So I have things like that here. Again, but I also have the release date and the price. So the first thing I want to talk about is the console itself. So, what we will actually be seeing on the console and the controllers. And the first thing is the mouse mode. I don't know if it's not really a secret anymore. We've seen a lot of speculation about it since the Nintendo Direct, since the reveal of the console in January. We've seen a lot of discussion about, is the mouse mode something that's actually going to happen? And I do believe it's going to happen. We saw the very small, 10 seconds or so of it in the Switch 2 reveal trailer, again in January. So I think that is a real function, and I think it will be a pretty, I don't know if I would say it would be like a huge part of this Direct, but I think it will be a pretty, substantial amount. I think we'll see a substantial section designated to it, because I think that will be the main differential mechanic between the Switch and the Switch 2. This mouse mode, I don't know if it'll be something that is required by Nintendo for third-party developers or their first-party games, but again, I think it will be a new way to obviously play your games or just to interact with your games in some way. The way I'm gonna like think about it is I think it's gonna be similar to like HD Rumble, like the big push Nintendo made with the Joy Cons and HD Rumble. I think we'll also see that with the mouse mode. What I'm going to call it is the mouse glide mode, which I think will be obviously shortened to mouse mode by the community and maybe even Nintendo. But I don't think Nintendo is just going to call it the mouse mode. I think it's going to have a special, little name to it like HD Rumble. And I think it's going to be mouse glide mode. But I do think there's not really too much to say about it besides, us seeing the mouse mode. We're probably going to see it in action, maybe with a game or so. But I think it's going to be like a mouse. It's going to be, we turn the Joy-Con onto the rail and we're just able to move around like with a mouse. I'm very interested to see, what this mouse mode does end up looking like, just because I don't think the Joy-Cons are actually gonna have like a scroll wheel or anything. So, it would be interesting just to see how they've been able to translate a mouse into the Joy-Cons, how it make that work. The mouse clicking buttons will obviously be the I think, well, it'll be the L and R button and then the ZL and the ZR button. So that makes sense, but I'm just very excited to see it in action. We just saw it in that promotional shot. It seems like, and this is getting a little ahead, but there has been the actual video for tomorrow's Nintendo Today that already came out, depending on your region. And it does show a mouse on its side, like, not as a mouse, a Joy-Con on its side like a mouse. And so I figured, this would be a good prediction because I do think it's going to happen. I do think we will see the mouse mode in this direct, and I think it'll be very cool. I think that's going to be the main hardware thing we're going to see here. They might talk about the Joy-Cons. I'm not expecting too much different in terms of like the function of the Joy-Cons. Like I think we're still going to see maybe an enhanced Rumble motor, but something like HD Rumble still in the Joy-Cons. I still think the right Joy-Con will have the amiibo functionality, or at least one of the Joy-Cons. Maybe they'll move it to the left Joy-Con this time, but I think that will still have the amiibo functionality. Maybe, and this is another prediction of mine, I do think controllers will be backwards compatible in terms of like the Switch 1 to the Switch 2 Joy-Cons. I think we will be able to use our Switch 1 Joy-Cons on the Switch 2. I'm very excited, well, not very excited, but I'm very interested in seeing how things like the right Joy-Con on the Nintendo Switch 1, like the right Joy-Con's IR sensor, how that's going to be addressed here, because it doesn't seem like the right Joy-Con anymore on the Switch 2 has a IR sensor. So I mean that kind of makes certain games either not playable, or you lose a function. Like in 1-2 Switch, you can't really do the sandwich eating mini game anymore if like you don't have a IR Joy-Con. So I'm very interested just to see how that works, how they address that. Maybe there's something that we don't know about yet, and maybe there is an IR sensor on the actual Joy-Cons. We'll have to see about that, but it doesn't seem like it's in the same place as it was on the old Joy-Cons. I guess you can't really refer to them as old either. I mean, I guess by Wednesday they will be the predecessor to the current Joy-Cons, but they wouldn't be old. We can still use them. They're like the Wiimote and the Wii U gamepad. The Wii U gamepad was obviously like the main controller for the Wii U, but many games allowed for you to use the Wii U remote, or the Wiimote. So I'm expecting that to be something similar that we see here. And I think that backwards compatibility with the controllers will also extend to things like the Pro Controller, like the NES and the SNES controllers, like the N64 controller, and pretty much like any third party or officially Nintendo released controllers are as well. Though I am interested in seeing, and we have seen what Nintendo's answer to this may be, and that is how these controllers will be charged. The Switch 1 Joy-Cons, the NES controllers, how those will be charged with a Nintendo Switch 2 that doesn't have the slide down rails. They have magnetic rails. I think they would talk about the charging grip that they've already released. They released it with Super Mario Party Jamboree. It's not really even a grip. It's like a charging dock of sorts that you can just plug in a USB Type C wire into the top, and then charge two Joy Cons on, or like the two NES controllers. I think they will mention that here. I don't think we're gonna see like a huge push for it or anything, because it's an accessory that will be for both Nintendo Switch and Nintendo Switch 2, presumably. But I think we will see that here. Just as I mentioned, as a thing like, oh, we can see the Switch 2. But yeah, Joy-Con backwards compatibility, controller backwards compatibility, I think will be a big thing that we hear about here. The final thing, that's something that, again, we've been seeing a little bit now in the marketing for Nintendo, from Nintendo for the Switch 2, is the C button. Again, we've been seeing it pop up now in the marketing through some of the promotional shots they've been releasing, both as the countdown and on the Nintendo Switch 2 section on the website. We will obviously hear what it is, what that exactly is. I do think I am in the majority here and saying that I think it is a community related button. I think with something like Nintendo Today, which released last week, I think that could have maybe in a hint of sorts, but I think the C button will connect to that in some ways. I think through like a social hub, but I think it will be a community button. I'm not sure it's gonna be called the community, like a community button. If I had to make a guess, I think that's like the easy way to call it. Like, you can easily connect to your community with the community button, but something like I've seen a lot of people discuss a campus button, it's called the campus button, and it connects to a social hub where you're able to connect with your friends, maybe go on Nintendo Today and see whatever news Nintendo released that day, stuff like that, add friends, maybe open up a party chat, which will go into the next prediction. But yeah, I think it will serve as a community button. I wrote down that I think maybe it connects to like a new Miiverse. I think I wrote this down a little while ago. I think the Miiverse functionality will be more connected towards something like Nintendo Today. I don't know if we'll ever see a Nintendo that fully goes back to what Miiverse was, just because they obviously ended Miiverse for a reason. It was probably harder to manage since it is like a fully fledged social media like platform. I think the alternative in Nintendo Today is a pretty good one. It doesn't, you're able to still react to the post Nintendo makes, but you're not able to make your own posts. I could see that maybe becoming a little bit more involved in the future, and if it connects to Nintendo Switch 2, but I could see that being a part of this community thing. I could see, again, party chats, something like, a friends list. Maybe your friends list isn't necessarily on the main page anymore. It is, or like through your profile, it is now through a community hub. But if this is the case, I also don't think the community hub will be something that is limited only to the C button. I think you will be able to access it on like the UI, like where we see right now on Nintendo Switch, we see the NSO button on the home screen, we see the eShop button. I think we will see things like that. I think we will see like a button pop up there, but the C button will be an easy way to get to that menu when you're in game, or you just press it and you go instantly into that section of the console, which will be very cool. It'll be very exciting to see what that is. That kind of connects to things like, again, with the UI, I think we will see a revamped eShop. There's been a lot of complaints in recent memory about the eShop and exactly what that will be, what that'll end up being. Will it be a lot more quicker? Will it have music? We will see a revamped eShop. I'm not really sure what that's gonna look like, just because I think that they do understand that the eShop is a lot slower, especially, so I think it's even slower than it was at launch when the console released in 2017, when it comes to the Switch. I think that they will try to make it a more dedicated app for the Switch, because I've read that the reason why it's so slow on the Switch is because it is more of like a web app that's framed as a mobile app on the console, and like it connects like the My Nintendo store and stuff like that. I could see them trying to make it more independent, and maybe that will also help the situation. But I think we will see revamps of like the NSO app and the eShop app. we'll probably keep the notifications app and the like the settings and everything. But I think that menu on the bottom, they keep even that. We'll have most of the same apps, and then something like a community app attached to it, and that connects. Talking about a community app to, I think there's been a lot of speculation that on the console itself there is a microphone, like an onboard microphone. I think that is real. I think we will see Nintendo mention that we have added a onboard microphone to the console, and we will see it in the form of voice chat, or you know the one thing I've been like thinking about when it comes to this prediction is the idea that I think we will see also the Pro Controller, whatever the Pro Controller ends up being, as a that will also have a microphone on it. So you don't necessarily need to always have the console. You can use it outside of just handheld mode. I think so. Yeah, I think the Pro Controller will have a microphone, maybe a grip in the future. Maybe they'll release like a microphone grip, or a some sort of grip that also has a microphone, so you don't have to, if you don't have a Pro Controller, you can just buy the grip, and then when you're in tabletop, or when you're in docked mode, you could still use a microphone. The grip, you have your Joy-Cons, microphone grip. But yeah, I think we're gonna have that, and I think we're also gonna have voice chat, as I mentioned earlier, and that all could be connected to this community thing that I think is the C button, and will be a button on the actual main screen. But we have to see about that. I think that's mainly all the predictions I have for the console itself. Again, as I mentioned, I think we're gonna see a new eShop. I think that also connects to a new operating system. That could mean new themes. Maybe we do return to what the 3DS had, and maybe have some game specific themes. But I also understand why Nintendo didn't really do much more with the actual operating system and the actual UI, because there was always the risk that the console could have some slowdown because of that. Hopefully with the more upgraded specs of the Nintendo Switch 2, that isn't much of a concern anymore. But if that's still the case, I can definitely see them prioritizing like speed, being able to go from one game to another, or just being able to boot the console up and then go to a game within like 30 seconds. I could definitely see them trying to prioritize that. But I think if they have the chance, they will go back to try to do some themes. Maybe they'll add just maybe a couple more general themes, if anything. But I think we will see that. But that is pretty much all of the main hardware predictions I had for the Direct on April 2nd. We'll definitely see a lot more hardware related stuff. This is just stuff I think this is just stuff that we've kind of been speculating for a while, and stuff that I agree with. Would I love to see a dual screen type of mechanic on the Switch 2? Yeah. If that is real, that could be announced here. The one thing I did not mention is that we do have that USB Type-C at the top of the console. Could that mean that we have two ways to charge the console? Of course. But I do think there is a reason why we do have two USB Type-Cs. I don't think they just put that on there for no reason. It definitely has a functionality on the console. So if it does allow you to, hook up another screen to it, or maybe, you can hook up a microphone through that, or, something like a camera, or something like if it like allows for certain accessories, I think that's very possible, but we'll obviously have to see what that is. If I had to guess what the USB Type-C is for, I would guess it's for accessories. I think they will talk about it in this Direct. If it is something major, maybe they won't if it's not something major, but this is what I believe to be the Nintendo Switch January 2017 equivalent for the Nintendo Switch 2. So I imagine we will see a pretty big blowout on what the console looks like, all the features. They'll definitely keep some things a secret for later drops on Nintendo Today and social media, but I think from this Direct we will definitely see most of what the console looks like, and obviously the new kickstand that we saw in the actual reveal trailer and everything like that. But the final prediction obviously is the price and the release date. I've been going between multiple date ranges when it comes to the actual release date for this console. I've settled on either June 12th or 13th or June 19th slash 20th. I am leaning towards the 12th or the 13th and not the 19th and 20th just because Nintendo is closed on June 19th for Juneteenth. So, while they would be open probably on the 20th, I do see it would be probably pretty difficult to market the console, for a while, not be able to say anything on June 19th and then have it released on the 20th. Even if that's not something that's like an issue all across the world, but I think in the US that is a big enough issue that they would move the release date to either the 12th or 13th or maybe even later on the 26th or 27th, or maybe that's not even an issue and we see it in May at some point. But I think between the end of May and the middle of June is when we'll see this console, and I'm just gonna guess the 12th or the 13th of June. Otherwise, I also think the price will be somewhere between $400 and $450. I'm gonna guess on the upper end of that and say $440. Nintendo has sometimes done these weird pricing structures with their consoles. The most recent one I can remember off the top of my mind is how they dropped the price of the Nintendo 3DS from 250, which was a normal number, to 170, or like 180, somewhere around there. I think that obviously they might do like a more common number, like a 450 or a 400, or maybe like a 425 of some kind. But I do think if they do that, I think it's them trying to find a price that, like, a number that they can also do in other regions. So I'm in this case I'm speaking like 440 US dollars. So if they do 400, I think they're gonna try to do 400 here, 400 in Europe. Just try to get that specific number down, and then obviously in regions where they have like a much larger currency that's equivalent, I think they're gonna obviously move around with those. I can't really predict on those ones, but 440 is just where I'm landing on for now. I think anywhere between 400 and 450 is where it's going to land. I could see it being a little less than 400, but how much less is like $10. I don't know if they're going to go much lower than that. But I can't see it going higher than 450. But yeah, that is pretty much all I have for predictions that we will see on the hardware side. I think I covered most of the console here, most of the actual physical console with these predictions. But obviously, when the direct happens, they will definitely surprise us for something. I'm sure no one expected HD Rumble to be a thing, or for things like I guess the IR camera of some sort. Like, we didn't expect. I don't think there was a lot of speculation about that at the time, so that was a huge thing. I'm not sure if there was like speculation of motion controls. I think motion controls will return in this console, and the Joy-Cons. I don't think that's ever really gonna be something Nintendo moves away from, just because it seems like it's something that they've mastered so much now, and it is something that's fairly essential with their games that they be moving over from the Switch to the Switch 2, like Splatoon and Nintendo Switch Sports, and even the 1-2 Switch and Everybody 1-2 Switch. I think motion controls is gonna stay. I think that's gonna be here, but I'm expecting some surprises for the hardware itself. These are just general predictions that I have. My software predictions are a lot more, I think a lot more aimed. And that's what I'm usually better at when it comes to direct predictions. But I tried just do a couple hardware predictions here, stuff I think we will see. But without further ado, let us get right into the software predictions. Since again, I have a lot more of those. I have a lot more things we can talk about when it comes to that. So when I talk about software, I do have certain sections of what things I think are like in the likelihood area. I think we will hear, before I get to like new announcements, I think we will see games like Metroid Prime 4 in this direct. I think we will see games like Pokemon Legends ZA in this direct. Just because I think they are going to talk about them having Switch 2 editions. We did hear about Nintendo virtual game cards in the direct last week on, I believe it was March 23rd. Nope, not March 23rd. But last Thursday, we obviously had that direct. I think it was March 27th. Yes, March 27th. We had that direct, and they did talk about the virtual game cards. I'm expecting them to mention that here, but maybe not go too much in depth in them, just because it's not. That's something that's also releasing on the Switch, so we will find out more about that once that update releases at the end of April. But I think we will hear about Switch 2 versions in this direct of Switch 1 games, and I think the poster child of that, if you may say, would be Metroid Prime 4. Just because I think that's gonna be a game that plays already really well on the Switch. You know, there will be, I think it's gonna run in between like 30 and 60 pretty consistently. I think it will be, you know, a HD game. You know, it will always be HD on Switch, but I think it will have enhancements that are more oriented towards the Switch 2s. You know, the Switch 2's extra power. You know, some of the processing power, maybe some of the graphical systems that they have on the console. I think that will help benefit Metroid Prime 4, and I think that's something they're going to talk about in this direct. I think they're going to talk about things like that in relation to games like Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom. I don't think they will mention it, but there's probably certain games that are just inherently better on Switch 2, but that maybe doesn't really get like an enhanced version, but if you put it on your console, you know, like something like the Pokemon games that, you know, I don't really have much issue with, but I know they don't run the best on the Switch. You know, maybe those inherently are just better, you know, when you're on Switch 2. That does make me feel a little, you know, maybe there won't be Pokemon Legends ZA news here, just because, you know, maybe they'll wait until that game actually releases and then say maybe it runs a little better on Switch 2. But I think we will hear about additions here. Again, I already mentioned Metroid Prime 4. I addressed the possibility of Pokemon Legends ZA. I don't know if we'll see much of Legends ZA otherwise. And I have a specific prediction for Metroid Prime 4, but maybe we see a new Mega here. I mean, this would be the time. They didn't review a new Mega last week. If that is here, maybe we do see a new Mega evolution. But you know, I think we'll have to see on if it's even here in the first place. But again, I think Switch 2 versions, Metroid Prime 4, Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, maybe some of the top-down Zelda games, stuff like that. They will maybe get specific versions, and then we will see games like, you know, maybe the Pokemon games, or Astral Chain, or like Bayonetta 2 and 3. Maybe those just inherently run better on the console. And they'll just talk about that, you know, as a processing power. But those are our new announcements. The new announcements, I think, is probably what's getting a lot of people excited. I do want to preface this by saying I don't have too many third-party announcements, just because I feel like it's going to be a little harder to predict those, because even in normal directs, it's pretty hard to predict third-party games. And now that we are entering a new generation, and there's probably going to be a lot of developers that want to get their games over onto Nintendo Switch 2 as soon as possible, we're probably going to see a lot of announcements of those in this direct as well. Some bigger ones like Elden Ring, maybe a Baldur's Gate 3, maybe some Atlas games that never came to the Switch, like Persona 3 Reload, or Metaphor ReFantazio, stuff like that. But, you know, if there's a game that I would want to come over, I guess it would be something like maybe the Atlas games. I mean, I don't know. You know, it's just too many games that you could necessarily say would appear here that are already announced or already released. The games like, you know, there's always the chance of Dragon Quest 1+2 HD 2D showing up in this direct, because it did open the last direct, but we also never got a release date for that. So, you know, it does make sense if they are, maybe they teased it again for that direct last week, and, you know, just to show people it is coming out still on Switch 1, but now, you know, we get a release date in the Switch 2 direct, maybe like July or June. I mean, June or July, maybe August is when that game releases, and then, you know, maybe it runs a little better on the Switch 2. We'll have to see about that. But you know, and speaking of that, we also have Dragon Quest 12. Maybe that makes an appearance here. We have things like other Square Enix games like Final Fantasy VII Remake and Rebirth, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and Final Fantasy VII Remake, in the opposite direction. You know, those are supposed to be flipped. But stuff like that I think will appear here as well. But it's hard again to predict these things just because I don't know if anyone really expected to see like Shin Megami Tensei 5 in the Switch 1 presentation from January 2017. But we also got the announcement of Project Octopath Traveler and smaller games like that. So third-party games, it's hard to predict. I would love, before we enter like the new announcements, to maybe see something like a Snipperclips pop up on the Switch 2. Not necessarily like a game like Snipperclips, but something in that vein where it is Nintendo published. So it's Nintendo published indie. I would love to see something like that here. I would love to see, maybe another collaboration between Nintendo and like Koei Tecmo for like Nintendo Warriors. But that's also still kind of getting into first party stuff. So without further ado, let's just get right into those things. I think we see a new Mario Kart here. I think that's the main thing that we are gonna talk about here, in terms of, the reason why I want to bring that one up first is because I think it's a launch title. I don't think they would have shown the game off with the Switch 2 if it isn't a launch title. I think we will see a pretty large showcase of that game here. I think we will see, new characters. I think we will see the 24 player, not mode, because I think that'll be actually part of like the main game, but like 24 players actual playable on one race, one course. I think we will see the addition of, well, not the addition, but them moving towards what Tour does with multiple tracks per course. So we saw that also with the booster course packs when they added over Tour tracks. We saw that for a good amount of the tracks or courses, there was like different paths you can take depending on the lap you were on. I think we're gonna see a lot more of that here in this reveal for the game. I don't really know if there's a way for like a prediction I have for the actual like main mechanic. Maybe a new adventure mode is the main mechanic, but I don't know if I have something like the anti-gravity or the being able to drive underwater or the glider for this game. I definitely probably will have one of those mechanics, and it's just gonna be something that's like really interesting and something that I probably wouldn't think about. I guess the one thing I think would be pretty cool would be something like maybe, and this is something that's also already been talked about a lot, but like Wonder Seed mechanics being added to the courses. But that would also come at the expense of, I think it would be a little difficult to implement those, just because I feel like it would be a situation where you are, it's like it has to be something that applies to every single racer and not just you. Or maybe it doesn't have to be like that. Maybe there are different like paths you can take through the Wonder Seed. Now that I'm thinking about it, that probably is like a more of like just a fun prediction, not really something that's that serious. It probably could happen, but I think that again, there definitely could be a new mechanic in this game. It could be story mode. It could be the 24 playable, playable characters per race or something like that. But we will definitely see a large blowout for the game, I think, here, or at least a large segment of the direct for this game. Just again, because I think it will be launching with the console itself. I don't really have anything else written about that here. I said it's gonna be around 5 to 7 minutes. The character I have predicted is we're gonna see Captain Toad make it in as a racer. I think that'd be pretty cool. We'll have to see about that, but I think Captain Toad, maybe Connie from Mario and Luigi Brothership. I think that'd be pretty fun. Stuff like that will definitely appear here, which is very, very cool for Mario Kart 8 and Mario Kart 9. Do I think it's been called Mario Kart 9? No. I think that they called Mario Kart 7 and Mario Kart 8 like they did just because those were like part of like that generation. And then obviously with Mario Kart 8 being moved over to the Switch, they kept that name. But I think we're going to see like a different naming scheme for this one. And it won't be like Mario Kart 9. It won't be like numbered. It will be like a subtitle for it, which will be very, very cool. Now, I do think the other game that's going to be pretty big, it's going to have a pretty big presence here, is a new 3D Mario. I was going back and forth, and maybe it could be something that's a big surprise. Maybe it's a new 3D Donkey Kong. I'm just gonna go with the safe prediction here and say that's a new 3D Mario. We haven't seen a new 3D Mario since 2017. Obviously, we did get Bowser's Fury in 2021, and I do expect this game to be an extension of that. Before I get into what I think the game is, I think it'll be releasing this holiday, so I don't think we'll see like a huge blowout of it here. I think we're gonna get something similar to what we saw with Odyssey, where we got the name reveal of it in the January presentation, and then in like the E3 direct or like a June direct, or June presentation, we saw like a much larger blowout. We saw the Cappy abilities and all that. And that'll be releasing, I believe. I don't know if I think they gave a release date then of October, but I think we will see that here. I think the first look that we got in the January presentation for Odyssey will be something similar we see here. They won't like talk about the main mechanic of it too much. But we will just see the new game. We will see this new sceneries. I would love something that is very similar to Bowser's Fury, where maybe it's not like a fully open world, but we have like a couple of worlds that are like huge, and you can just explore. So like I guess in this sense, like a extension of what Odyssey was, like I guess a mixture of what Odyssey and Bowser's Fury was. And then like those areas like unlock as you progress through the game, with maybe some again like that aren't absolutely accessible from just being able to run around in the world. They maybe have to like get on like something like the airship in. It wasn't really an airship; it was like a hot air balloon in Super Mario Odyssey, and then you have to like traverse over to that with that. But I think we will see something like that here. I think the name of it will be, and this is just a guess. I gave it the title of, if I can find it. So give me a second on that. Oh wait. No, okay, no, I didn't give that a title. I gave Mario Kart a title, and I said I think it's gonna be called Mario Kart Universe. So, like I said, I don't think they're gonna do the naming, the number naming for Mario Kart, the new Mario Kart. But I didn't think for 3D Mario. I think I'm not. I guess they could go like Super Mario World, but that's obviously already like a 2D name. So I don't know if they would go through to do that. But like Super Mario Explorers or something like that. I think that'd be kind of cool. Because I do think it's gonna be like a very, like I think it's gonna be somewhere that leans more towards Bowser Fury, but it's still gonna have some of the Odyssey traversal mechanics. But still, I think that will be like the big game besides besides Mario Kart that we see here. At least in a very notable fashion of sorts. I think we will see that. There's obviously other games we will see from Nintendo. I guess I didn't really say it earlier, but I think we will see 4 to 5 major Nintendo announcements here at this direct. That doesn't include Metroid Prime 4, or like Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, or Pokemon Legends ZA. I think we will see 4 to 5 games announced between the release of the console and maybe like March of next year. So, we got 3D Mario, we got Mario Kart out of the way. The final game I think is pretty much a lock in my mind, outside again of Mario Kart, 3D Mario, Metroid Prime 4, and then maybe a couple of Switch games that are getting Switch 2 editions that like have enhancements, is a new casual game. The way I refer to this as is a EPD4 game. So in case you did not know, that is how Nintendo splits up like their development structure. So I think we will see a new EPD4 game announced. Or just maybe then from EPD4 necessarily, but like a new casual game, like 1-2 Switch, like a Nintendo Land, like a Nintendo Switch Sports, Wii Sports, something like that. I think we'll have that announced here. And depending on what we see for Metroid Prime 4, I think either this is launching with Mario Kart Universe. I think either that's going to launch with Mario Kart Universe, or I think we will see Metroid Prime 4 launch with Mario Kart Universe. It depends on how Nintendo wants to treat Mario Kart. If they want to treat it as the big launch title that that like serves as both the single player and the multiplayer game. I could see that with Mario Kart Universe, but and then like have a new casual game besides that. But if they want to treat that more as the multiplayer casual game, I could see Metroid Prime 4 taking the more single player game that they want to release. But there isn't really much to predict for a new EPD4 casual game. Again, I would love a new Nintendo Land, so that's what I'm rooting for. But I think this is also where we're gonna see one of maybe one or like two examples of where we see where Nintendo's gonna announce a new IP in this direct. Um, Obviously, again, I would love a new Nintendo Land, but I think this is where a new IP could be announced, and they talk about a new IP. But I think that is it for like the things I think that are definitely going to happen in this direct. Um, the other things that I have are much more. Maybe it happens, maybe it doesn't happen. The direct last week did change my opinion on one of my predictions, so we'll get into that. But yeah, again, I think these things are like the things I believe are like 75% to 100% happening. And like Metroid Prime 4 being thrown in there, as I mentioned, get a new trailer. If it isn't a launch title, Metroid Prime 4 is not a launch title. I think that we will see that in July. I think they've been showing it off a good amount now, that I don't think they're going to push it to like this holiday. I think it will be this July if it isn't a launch title for the console. But I did want to consider it. Maybe it does launch a Mario Kart. Maybe it doesn't launch a Mario Kart. Maybe it has, maybe it has something to do with the more casual side. Well, I'm not okay. I'm rambling off a little bit here, but again, I think with Mario Kart, I think that is very much a possibility to be the casual title. It ultimately just really depends on if Mario Kart, if they view maybe Mario Kart maybe overshadowing Metroid Prime 4 to a certain extent. There's a lot of considerations Nintendo obviously needs to make, but those four, 3D Mario, Mario Kart, EPD4 game, and something like Metroid Prime 4, not something like Metroid Prime 4 will be like the major locks for this. And then other software will, be additional. So, pretty much all of the predictions after this are largely, things that I don't feel super confident in. Maybe I feel a little confident in them, but I don't feel like super confident. And that's just mainly just because pretty much, I mean, when we look back at the January 2017 Nintendo Switch presentation, we saw things I think were pretty guaranteed, like a new Breath of the Wild trailer, like a Super Mario Odyssey. We saw Mario Kart 8 Deluxe in the sizzle reel. We saw Splatoon 2 be announced. But then we got big surprises like a Fire Emblem Warriors, Xenoblade Chronicles 2, ARMS, 1-2 Switch, Snipper Clips, Shin Megami Tensei 5. So I think from this point forward, we got the four big ones I think that will be here, but everything else is, up in the air. It depends on what Nintendo really wants to announce this year, and what else is releasing for the Switch 2 this year. The direct last week did change my opinion on, as I mentioned, it changed my predictions a little bit, just because the way that they framed a lot of the announcements that they made and a lot of the games that they are releasing first party wise, they didn't give dates for this year, and they announced two games that are for next year. So it makes me feel like the Switch 1 games will be a lot smaller for the year. Games that they can announce through social media or like in a direct like this, where like they can be cross-gen, but obviously have like those enhancements on the Switch 2. But it made me feel like the Switch 2 is gonna be the major focus for the next couple months. They're gonna announce games and release games on the Switch 1, but the Switch 2, from May, June to the end of the year, that's where most of their first party games will be released on. So, I don't think we're gonna see any of the games that were announced last week in this direct. Maybe we'll see logos for them, as like a future timeline or like future roundup, like what Nintendo's gonna be releasing between again now and like June of next year. But I don't think we're gonna see those games. But The last couple of games that I have listed here, again, as I mentioned, will be, kind of interesting to talk about. Just because, again, they could be anything. We could see. I've written down a couple of games that I feel like are like in the range of like 50 to like, or I mean like 40 to like 60% possible. And that is like a new game from Next Level Games. Maybe then Luigi's Mansion, maybe a Luigi's Mansion 4 of some kind. We are 3 years by the time this console probably releases from the last Next Level game. Next Level Games game. I guess unless Luigi's Mansion 2 HD did take up a good amount of their development resources, maybe that was their last game. But for their last new game in Mario Strikers Battle League, that was in 2022. So I think a new game from Next Level Games is very possible to be announced here. I think something like it's possible a new Donkey Kong 2D game is announced here. There was rumors a long time ago, maybe like 2 or 3 years ago, that talked about a EPD8, which was the 3D Mario studio, working on a new 2D game alongside a 3D game. I think that is very possible. I think that's very possibly a 2D Donkey Kong game. We'll just have to wait and see on that. But it also really just depends. We have to think about Mario Kart at launch, 3D Mario as the big holiday game, alongside probably Pokemon Legends CA. Those 2 to 3 games are probably their main pillars for the year. So like everything else will probably be on the level of something like something like, I mean, I don't even want to say something like something small, because I was gonna say something like Splatoon 2. A pretty major game, but like nothing that is as huge as like a new Mario Kart or a 3D Mario. Like we're probably gonna want like a Splatoon 2 level game, and then something maybe like 2 or 3 other smaller games that released this year. And that could be a new Fire Emblem or a Fire Emblem 4 remake. That could be cross-gen. That is like the main game I have listed here as a cross-generation game. I could see it easily happening in the way that they debuted the Direct. They're like, oh, okay, this is all mainly focused on Switch 2, but they do make one announcement for a game that's maybe releasing in July, and that is a Fire Emblem 4 remake, and they say it's gonna be available both on the Switch 2 and the Switch 1. I could see that happening. I think that'd be pretty cool. But besides that, the last game I have listed here as possible is the new Sakurai title, Mr. Sakurai title, that was teased in his within the game developing series that he's been doing, or he was doing, on his YouTube channel for the longest time. In the final episode, he did say that I believe most of the episodes, not all the episodes, were recorded back in 2022, right before he started development on a new video game. So it's been at least 2 years of development, I believe, for that video game. So if it is a Switch 2 game, it could be announced here. I want to be very optimistic and say it's a new Kid Icarus game, but it's also very possible it's a new Smash game. Again, it's really hard to predict for a huge direct like this, and in general with like directs, how far does Nintendo want to go with their announcements? Do they want to have end of next year announcements, and for like 2026, like their big November game for next year be announced? I'm not sure. I think if they do have a 3D Mario this year, I kind of can't see them not like releasing a new Smash Brothers, but something like a new Kid Icarus is something I can see happening. And then maybe they have a Smash Ultimate port or a Smash Ultimate enhanced version come to the Switch, and that serves as the major Smash game. And then Mr. Sakurai can work on a new Kid Icarus, maybe a new IP at some point throughout the generation, and not have to spend too much time with Smash. Maybe add a couple more characters, stuff like that. But let's see what happens. I think this is probably the next best chance for that IP to be revealed, if it's going to probably release within the next 12 months. If it isn't, I could see it, being announced like in a February, March direct next year, as like the big announcement, but we'll have to see on that. But I guess the last game, and this just came to my mind, was something like the NSO playtest game. That has been something that obviously we have some footage of just because of, not really leaks, but, screenshots we've gotten on social media from those that were able to play the game. That could be announced here. It is a Switch 1 game as well, so it does make me feel like that's something that they could easily announce in like a June direct for this year, or like a September direct for like a November release for the Switch, or maybe like an October release, maybe a shadow drop in that direct. But I don't think in this direct is somewhere where they're going to announce too many Switch 1 games. I think Fire Emblem 4 is probably going to be the biggest Switch 1 game, if that's even announced in this direct. And if it's not, if no, there isn't a Fire Emblem here, I don't really know if I can see another game be announced as like a cross-gen game. So the playtest game is like in the middle. It's like teetering between something I think that's possible and something that I think is not very it's pretty not likely to happen here. And then like those games that I've said are pretty not likely would include something like a new Star Fox. Maybe I did put a new Star Fox on my bingo card for this direct, and I will probably release a new video detailing on that bingo card a little bit later in the day, right before the direct itself happens. But I did include new Star Fox. I think that was a very out there prediction. I also included a new Pikmin. I think that was also a very out there prediction for this direct. I don't know if either of those things are even possibly gonna happen. I guess if I had to give like a edge to one of them, I think it would be Star Fox. Just because we haven't had new Star Fox in a while, but we did have Pikmin 4 in 2023. But the last game, I have a couple more games first party wise. I have a new Nintendo Warriors that I mentioned earlier. I don't know if I can see that happening. That's kind of based on solely what we saw in the January 2017 presentation. We saw Fire Emblem Warriors be revealed, so why not can another Nintendo Warriors game be revealed here? Again, that prediction is just based on what we have already seen happen in the past, especially with series wise. So it's kind of like a prediction that can happen, but I could see that being replaced with like a new IP announcement. Because again, we look at the 2017 January presentation, there was the Mario Kart, there was the 3D Mario, there was the new Xenoblade, there was the new Splatoon, there was a new, and that might have been it for the major announcements: Mario Kart, Mario Odyssey, Splatoon, Xenoblade, and then there was like Fire Emblem Warriors, and then which I guess Warriors is like a teetering between like a new IP and not a new IP, but we did see two new IPs in 1-2 Switch and ARMS. So I mean, again, as I mentioned earlier, I think the casual game would be a new IP, and I could see maybe a Nintendo Warriors game in this prediction is being replaced with like a new IP from Nintendo. Maybe the playtest game, but something that's a little different. The final two games I have listed here, predictions wise, is a title from the studio at Nintendo that makes Animal Crossing and Splatoon. The reason why I have this one listed is just because I can either see this or the game I'm going to predict next being the game that they announced now but isn't releasing for maybe another year, maybe a year and a half. But I think it would be Splatoon 4, and I don't think they were gonna want to announce Splatoon 4 before announce and release probably Splatoon 4 before Animal Crossing. And with Tomodachi Life being announced last week for next year, I don't think they're gonna want to have Tomodachi Life and Animal Crossing in the same year. So before I thought maybe this would like go in like the section that I had talked about, the new Sakurai game, maybe something from Next Level Games. This has fallen pretty far down just because I don't think they're gonna announce a new Splatoon game here. And I think Animal Crossing, even if it is ready, I think they're gonna hold that off for maybe 2027. Just so, they don't have too many of the similar games released in the same year. Especially since Tomodachi Life is probably gonna be like a 10 million seller. I don't know if Animal Crossing will probably, Animal Crossing will probably be the bigger of the two, so it'll probably sell more, and it'll probably overshadow Tomodachi Life to a certain extent. But if they don't do that, if they don't tease something like a Animal Crossing Splatoon for next year, as like their next, major, launch, after the Switch 2 releases, like a long lasting launch title, a release for a game. I could see it being a new 3D Zelda. Um, this is the hardest one to predict because obviously it could be something as, we could see like a enhanced version of the Wind Waker HD port or the Twilight Princess HD come over to the Nintendo Switch 2, or something even as major as an Ocarina of Time remake be announced here that maybe releases next year. But you know the like the very interesting viewpoint that I am having and thought process is that maybe we do see new 3D Zelda announced here, and I don't want to say it's like super likely or even very close to being likely or even, maybe more than 5% likely of happening. But I do want to give it the chance that a new Zelda could be announced here and then maybe release. Maybe it's like a small teaser, like the Tears of the Kingdom teaser, something similar to that. And, it doesn't release until like maybe 2027, 2028. And that release date is really what's keeping me off from, saying I don't think we'll see it here, but I think it's a possibility. I just wanted to mention it. Again, it's on my bingo card that I will talk about in a video later today. But again, I think 3D Zelda possible. I'm not thinking it's super likely at all. But the last thing I want to talk about is NSO, and I did mention it a little bit earlier when we were talking about the UI and some of like the Switch hardware stuff. I do think we see an update for NSO here. It could range all the way from just being something that they're like releasing a couple of games that maybe would be a little more difficult to have added to the Switch 2. I mean, like the Switch, maybe like Mario Paint is being added to NSO. I guess the Mario Paint could also just be announced for the Switch 2 here, but I didn't want to mention that just because I feel like it's very it speaks much more to like the gimmick of the console than the actual, like it speaks, that's like me predicting just based on the gimmick solely, than actually like would it be like a new game. But maybe Mario Paint for NSO on Switch 2, but it could just be like a price increase with like some additional additions that are exclusive to the Nintendo Switch 2. But the one thing that I have been considering is that I think GameCube could be announced here, and maybe that's why we also haven't been seeing games like Wind Waker and Twilight Princess make it over to the Switch. Maybe they did have them ready for the Switch, but if GameCube is coming to the Nintendo Switch 2 NSO service, I could easily see that being, why? I mean, especially since if at this point those games would be releasing after the Switch 2 releases, I could see, maybe the Metroid Prime 2, again, the Wind Waker and the Twilight Princess, the Mario Sports games from the Wii, from the GameCube, those all making it over through a GameCube NSO. That's maybe like $20, $30 more per year, but still, that's like the major NSO thing I could see them adding. I don't know if they're gonna do DS NSO unless that that accessory of like a new screen, like additional screen, is real. But besides that, that's honestly pretty much all I have for predictions for this direct. That's all I have. Yeah, that is again all I have for this direct for predictions wise. It's very possible this prediction video is matching in lengthwise how long the direct may be, because I'm thinking it's going to be around an hour, maybe a little less, maybe a little more. But we are at 59 minutes now, so I think I'm going to wrap it up here. I did go through all of my predictions pretty much that I have for the Switch 2 direct. There isn't really much more I can really say here. I guess I could talk a little bit more about, I think the direct's going to open up a Mario Kart. I think the middle sections will be the Switch 2 enhanced games, the reveal of the casual game, and then, maybe something like a, again, maybe a, Nintendo Warriors, or, like a new 2D Donkey Kong, like one more last middle. And then 3D Mario is like the large end thing, like the large closer for the direct. Obviously that all will change if a new 3D Zelda is announced, but let's see about that. Obviously, I think we will also have a pretty major segment at the beginning of the direct that talks about the console just itself, you know, the price again, the release date, some of the hardware features. I think it will try to replicate the Switch January 17 presentation to a T, pretty much. But yeah, that is all I have for you all today. So I hope you all enjoyed this video. I hope you all enjoy and are very excited for the Nintendo Switch 2 Nintendo Direct on April 2nd. But without further ado, I hope you all do what makes you happy, because that rhymes with generic happy, and I'll see you in the next one. I will also be watching that direct, so I'm very excited about the two. But without further ado, I'll see you on the next one. Goodbye. Goodbye. Also, before I forget, I will be obviously recording my reaction to the direct once it airs on April 2nd, 2025. I may live stream it, but I'm thinking I'm probably just going to record it as it's happening and then upload it a little after the fact. But yeah, I just wanted to mention that as well. I hope you all enjoy this video. I hope you all enjoy the direct on Wednesday. And yeah, I will see you all then. Make sure to make you happy, turn Junior Cappy, and goodbye.